Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today we are joined by the wonderful Dr. Brad Leech. Dr. Brad is a PhD Clinical Nutritionist and herbalist specializing in chronic autoimmune conditions and complex gut disorders. As the Lead Clinical Educator at Co-Biome by Microba, he translates cutting-edge microbiome research into practical applications for both clinicians and patients. With a background in integrative and functional medicine, Dr. Brad has developed evidence-based guidelines, including the IP guideline for managing intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, and his mission is twofold: to equip practitioners with the tools to interpret microbiome reports effectively and to help individuals take control of their gut health. Welcome, Dr. Brad, and thank you for being here.
Rachel, it's wonderful to be chatting all things gut health and the microbiome and delving deep into the inside, into the ecosystem we call the microbiome.
It's going to be a bit of a nerd session, but I'm so excited for this. And obviously with the Gutsy Talks podcast, so heavily focused on gut health, I thought we have to get Dr. Brad on the podcast ASAP because, you've got a lot of information to share. So I'm really excited to have you here.
I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be a great chat.
So let's dive off, I guess, going a bit simple and then maybe get into some more interesting questions. But I wanted to hear from you first about, I guess, what really led you into this field of gut health? What was your personal journey to where you are today?
And, many practitioners have a story where they saw a naturopath, they saw a nutritionist for their own symptoms. Mm-hmm. To this day, I've never seen a nutritionist or a naturopath.
Wow.
I'm one of those very lucky few where I don't have any health conditions.
Yep.
But I've got this thirst for knowledge and this desire to understand, complex information. And it was almost like the stars aligned in the sense of I just did one degree after the other, to honors, to PhD. But the real factor that really influenced my desire to focus on gut health was really wanting to focus on autoimmunity. So my original passion and focus is autoimmunity.
Yep.
And when I first started my PhD and my honors, I had a sit-down conversation with my supervisors. And I basically said, I want to find the cure for autoimmune disease. And they almost chuckle to themselves and they have a bit of a laugh and they go, Brad, this is a PhD, this is in a whole research center.
Yep.
You need to find one small component and research it until you can't research it anymore. And at that particular time, this is going back to 2015, and an article came out from Dr. Vassano, who basically was the godfather around the discovering intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut. And he said that there is a link between intestinal permeability and the exacerbation and the development of autoimmune disease.
Yes.
And I said, gotcha, I'm going to focus on this. And so I spent the better part of 6, maybe 7 years really honing down on intestinal permeability to kind of make that realization that intestinal permeability is only one component of gut health. And perhaps the biggest component is the microbiome.
Yep.
So yes, leaky gut can drive up autoimmunity, and that's a really important concept. But when it comes around to retraining the immune system, so things like inflammatory bowel disease and even diabetes, we can utilize the microbiome to change immune expression, thereby your body's not attacking itself. So that's where I kind of pivot from intestinal permeability to really focusing on the microbiome, because this space, the research going into the microbiome is huge. Every single day, there is more and more research coming out, linking it with chronic disease, finding different interventions that we can use as clinicians or even patients on what we can do to change the microbiome.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think, having a story that doesn't come out of your own pain is just like, like everyone's got their own journey to where they are today. And I think, you've also been known around the woods as having the golden microbiome. So we're happy to have someone in this field with the gold
It's
star.
referred to as the Golden Poo. And
Oh,
maybe we
okay.
can get into it, but basically, when I measure my microbiome, and I do this on a yearly basis, I have what's referred to as a great microbial diversity. So that's looking at the number of bacteria in my gut.
Mm.
And I've got upwards of 250. And so, there are a bit of a competition in and around the naturopathic community who's got the healthiest gut.
Yes.
And we go to these conferences. It's like, how many species do you have in your gut? It becomes a fun conversation. So yes, I am known as the man with the golden poo. I did look at this back in my uni days when I had no money.
Yep.
You could actually donate your fecal matter to be utilized in fecal transplants.
Amazing.
And I looked at it and it was $50 a sample. That's
Great.
$250 a week. That's $13,000 a year for
Oh,
basically giving an organization your stool.
yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
But the issue was just the effort to get my fecal matter to
Yes.
a lab. I thought this is too hard. And then I
Mm.
had this great idea, Uber poops.
Is
You
that a
have
thing?
some You have somebody ride around on their bike, collecting everyone's fecal matter and taking it straight to the lab. I never went down that avenue, but if anyone's looking for a business venture, Uber poops.
I didn't think this would be like a business opportunity podcast, but I mean, as I said, we'll take it any direction that we go. And you touched on really something I wanted to speak about is like this idea of like the ideal healthy gut and like, does it look the same for everybody? Like, are there certain markers? Like, everyone's like, I want my gut to be healthy. Like, what is it that we're trying to achieve?
Mm. What's quite interesting here is no two guts are the same.
Mm.
Even if you get two people with golden poo
Hmm.
or golden microbiomes, they will have very different bacteria and species and functions within their gut. So there's no perfect gut.
Yep.
There are a number of bacteria which we commonly see in healthy individuals,
Yep.
but you don't necessarily need to have a particular bacteria to have a healthy gut.
Yep.
It's basically taking a step back and looking at the overall function. Ideally speaking here,
Hmm.
a healthy gut is a diverse gut.
Yes.
What I mean by diverse gut, I'm talking about a balanced number of bacteria. So around that 200 point when it comes around to looking at individual species,
Yep.
but then also evenness. So you don't want one bacteria dominating your microbiome, or
Yep.
you don't want particular bacteria to be really, really, really low. So it's about having an even number of these bacteria at around that 200 mark.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like that's really important for people to know because I often say like your gut microbiome is as unique as your fingerprint. Like
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
yours, but it is helpful to maybe have some sort of goal people are working towards. And I would agree like diversity and I guess the evenness as to how they're spread, like that is one thing that doesn't matter what your bugs are, we can all kind of aim for that, knowing that we'll have our individual twist on those numbers. And so we spoke about healthy gut, but like what are the signs or yeah, how do people know that they don't have a good gut? If they've got a bad gut, an unhealthy gut, like what does that look like?
Most people would think bad gut. I would
Mm,
have IBS. I would
mm,
have constipation, loose stools, bloating. And sure,
yep.
that is one section of individuals with a bad gut. But because gut health has been linked with so many different conditions, the indicators of a bad gut could be Hashimoto's.
Yes.
It could be poor sleep. It
Mm,
could be poor concentration. It could be any aspect of our life
yes.
that isn't correct. Now, I'm
Yep.
not saying that poor sleep and the microbiome are directly linked in the sense of if you've got bad sleep, it 100% is your microbiome, but it is a contributing factor.
Mm,
And so, what I generally see with my patients is they'll have multiple factors where they'll have a bit of bloating and they have trouble with sleep and they have a bit of stress, and then maybe that they're sensitive to different environmental chemicals, whether it's perfume and makeup and so forth. So
mm,
there's so many different factors So unfortunately, there's no golden answer to
Yeah.
say, if you have this, you have a bad gut,
Yeah.
because there are so many imbalances that you may be experiencing that
Yeah.
could be linked up with a bad gut.
And I think that's also, it's important to note because we're really talking about just all the different ways and connections that our gut has, how it expresses. Like, it's important for people to know that there's not just one set of or five different symptoms. Like, it could be anything from like skin conditions,
Mm,
autoimmune conditions,
mm,
different hormonal conditions will have links to the gut. Like, I think it's important for people to know that because the gut can be a bit of a missing piece for people. So if people have that level of awareness, hopefully that they can bring in maybe a bit more of a holistic approach to what they're trying to fix, correct, support, that kind of thing. So I think not having that one answer is what people really need to hear. And when we're talking about, I guess, a gut that isn't ideal, I know that there's this oversimplification of good versus bad bugs. So like, but I think there's a little bit more to that. It's a bit more nuanced than that. So like, is there good and bad bugs or what is it?
This is advanced microbiology, and trust me, there are many practitioners that aren't aware of this.
Yeah.
We are slowly advancing as a profession, and even with my patients,
Mm.
it's that communication. And sometimes I will say good and bad
Yes.
bacteria
Just yeah.
because it's simple and it's something that we can understand. Microbiology and understanding ins and the outs of hundreds of thousands of species, we can't just categorize them to good and bad.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, yes, there
Yeah.
are bacteria which we could classify as bad, and these are, from one extreme, what we refer to as pathogens.
Mm.
Think of barley belly,
Yeah.
delly belly.
Good.
That
Yeah.
they are bad bugs. They are pathogenic infections like E. coli, where you pick up food poisoning
Mm.
overseas, causing diarrhea, nausea, maybe a fever. They are bad bugs. We
Mm.
don't want them in our gut. There are other ones, and now this is getting a little more in depth here, referred to as pathobionts. Pathobionts are a group of microbes which are linked with a negative health outcome, meaning that based on the research, we see more of these pathobionts in individuals with inflammatory bowel disease, IBS, GORD, multiple health
Metabolic
conditions,
conditions, things like that.
metabolic conditions,
Yeah.
so many different conditions. Now, these are producing negative compounds in our gut, driving up inflammation, whether it's systemic inflammation or intestinal inflammation. But then on the other hand, we've got these commensals.
Yeah.
So we've got these beneficial bacteria. Now, simply put, some people would say these are probiotics.
Mm-hmm.
They're not technically probiotics.
No.
So probiotics are something that we would take.
Yes.
And probiotics are fantastic, and maybe we'll get to that later on. But within your gut, we've got so many more beneficial bacteria than
Mm.
just bifidobacterium and
Yeah.
lactobacillus.
Mm.
It's quite interesting when you ask AI
Yes.
questions about the microbiome. Oh, what does a healthy microbiome look like? And it will say, oh, we'll have good balance of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. It's oversimplifying it. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of beneficial bacteria that we want,
Mm.
more than just bifidobacterium and lactobacillus.
Yeah, and that is an excellent PSA of not to obviously always be using Chat GTP for your AI for any sort of health advice because it ain't always true. And you're right, because there are different types of tests out there and our gut microbiome testing has come a long way. But for many years until we got to, I guess, the level that we are today, it was actually as simple as that. So not only were, I guess, as a field, we were only kind of able to test those, but that's kind of still there's a bit of a hangover for what's being recognized.
Mm.
So to have testing such as the metagenomic testing that these days we can access, like we're actually seeing every species, like we're really seeing it for what it is.
And that's 100% right. When I first started in clinical practice, going back 15, maybe 20 years ago, the types of gut testing available, they are barbaric. I'm talking like, how could we even consider that they were clinically useful?
For sure.
I, I'm scared for what they actually showed.
Mm.
But we've advanced in the last
Yes.
15, 10, even in the last 5 years. I say that we have advanced so much now that I'm very confident that what we're pulling out of the microbiome is helping myself as a practitioner, even
Mm.
yourself, to help patients to say, what could be driving this
Yes.
and where do we need to go? What direction can we head based on the results of a microbiome test?
Yeah. And I do think like one of my beliefs is that yes, testing costs, but it costs less than the guessing game of not having that information. And so with that information is power, better choices and
Mm.
hopefully better patient outcomes. And so I think for people who are looking at getting their testing done, like are there types of tests, obviously not naming names, but like, are there types of tests that you would be saying favor these over others in terms of the quality of information they would be wanting to get that's actually useful?
There's two factors to consider here:
Mm-hmm.
the type of test
Mm-hmm.
and the education of your practitioner.
Yes.
Right? You can have the best test in the world with a practitioner that doesn't understand microbiome testing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they unfortunately won't be able to apply that effectively. Someone like yourself or someone who's done advanced training who specializes in the gut, they are the types of practitioners who can utilize comprehensive microbiome data to direct treatment. So, number one for
Yes.
patients is your practitioner advanced and qualified in the area of microbiome interpretation? So that's
Yeah.
number one. The second one here is there's different types of tests. There's tests that you can get from the GP, and
Yep.
then there's tests that you can do privately. And I understand everything has a cost. We have
Yep.
what we refer to as a health dollar, and that
Mm.
health dollar is how much we have to spend on our health. By utilizing some of that health dollar to spend on testing, it means we need to spend less on different supplements and other interventions because we're doing targeted interventions.
Yep.
So when choosing a gut test, you want a comprehensive gut test that utilizes metagenomic sequencing. So basically, this is DNA sequencing to look at all of the bacteria in the gut. So you
Yep.
ask your practitioner, is the test you're recommending metagenomics? And if it is, fantastic, because that's going to be a comprehensive report, a comprehensive data to direct, well, what do we need to do for this individual?
Yep. And I think it's like you said, really important about the interpretation of results. You can have all the information in the world, but don't know what to do with it. Like it is, you need that power
Mm,
couple of
mm.
information and implementation. What is, I guess, one of the most misunderstood aspects or myths about the microbiome testing? Any part of it that you're just like, I've been dying to correct this.
Candida.
Okay, all right, let's talk about candida.
This is a big one.
Yep.
This is a huge topic. And so that goes back to that point that you made a little bit earlier about, the 10, 15 years ago,
Mm.
what was measured on a test, what
Hmm.
was commonly measured was candida.
Yep.
Now, candida is a yeast, right? What's really, really, really interesting is I've done almost about 300 metagenomic tests, in the last 2 years, that is.
Yep.
Of those 300 plus tests, I have seen candida in two patients.
Mm.
Two patients have candida. One of these patients was a 20-year-old young boy who had inflammatory bowel disease, going to the bathroom 10 times a day,
Mm.
in and out of hospital, blood in his stool.
Yeah.
The other patient had her large intestine removed and
Mm.
actually had a bag on her, basically where the waste is going into.
Yes.
So these are examples of when you would see true candida overgrowth. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because of outdated technology from 10, 15 years ago, the whole community, even what you see on the news or in social media is terrible from this candida perspective.
Yeah.
Candida isn't as common as what we once thought.
Yeah.
Let me give you another example. Candida loves to grow in an oxygen-rich environment,
Hmm.
which has a lot of nutrients.
Yeah.
Now you think about a stool collection kit. You've
Yep.
got a little kit, you take a sample of your stool, you put it in, you post it away. I've got colleagues and friends who actually work in the lab who will interpret and will take the samples and will do the nitty-gritty things of actually looking at fecal matter.
Yep.
And they used to tell me stories back in the day where they'd crack it open and you'd actually see candida growing out of the
Oh
container.
my God. Wow. That is a visual I didn't need, Brad.
I am sorry. It's a visual that we need to acknowledge and appreciate.
Yes.
Because back 10 years ago, Australia Post was a little slow.
Yep.
We didn't control for temperature. And so
Yes.
you'd send off your sample and it would take a couple of days, maybe a week to get there. It wasn't kept on an ice brick. And then because the candida was able to grow in this nutrient-rich, oxygen-rich environment, we were finding it. Every second test was positive for candida.
Mm.
Now, those would say, well, no, 10 years ago, I did a candida diet and a candida cleanse, and I got
Yes.
so much better.
Yeah.
I did that. I recommended patients to go
Yeah.
on a candida diet and to treat candida. Look at the fundamentals of that diet.
Yes.
Removing sugar, removing highly processed grains, having a whole food diet. Was it the fact that it was candida, or was it the fact that we're cleaning up the diet?
Yes. Yep.
So you won't necessarily find candida unless you're a really, really, really sick individual.
Okay, that's really good to know because I think like you said, the type of testing, the transportation of testing, and it's also, when we're talking about it, we don't want people to get hyper focused or laser focused on an organism where we're trying to really emphasize that it's about a community. It's a whole living network of how things are working together. So to just kill candida isn't actually what's going to probably keep it away. We need to be thinking of the microbiome as a whole. And that's kind of exactly what we're talking about, get all the information to know actually how to treat it. What about parasites? I feel like there is, even in the time that I've been in practice to now, like there's definitely been a change in what we think about parasites. What's your take in terms of their role? Are they being overdiagnosed? Like, are they just, picked up when that's not really the issue? Like, what is it?
Yeah. And I recall a conversation I had with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and she works in a health food shop here on the Sunshine Coast. And she goes, Brad, every second person coming into the health food shop wants a parasite cleanse. And so there is this wave on social media about parasite cleanses.
Yeah.
First of all, do we really need to do this cleanse? It comes down to what type of parasite is there.
Yes.
Now, there are parasites that can cause a lot of GI symptoms. I'm not denying that.
No.
But what is happening here is the over-identification of two particular parasites.
Yep.
Blastocystis hominis
Yes.
and D. fragilis.
Yep.
These two parasites, and they are parasites, they are covered under Medicare here in Australia, whereby GPs can measure for them. Now, about 20–30% of the population will have these parasites. Healthy individuals will have these parasites. I recall a article that was published just 2 months ago that showed those with blastocystis had a lower BMI than those without blastocystis.
Yeah.
Some would take that research and say, oh, we could actually treat obesity with blastocystis.
The new Ozempic, perhaps.
That's not what I'm saying.
I know.
Association data. But D. fragilis and blastocystis, they are very common.
Yeah.
Now, with blastocystis, there are at least 8 subtypes that we can currently measure in the data in Australia at the moment.
Yeah.
The research is coming out to say that there could be 25 or even 50.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of different subtypes. My theory here is there could be 1 or 2 subtypes which could be problematic.
Yes.
And a 50.
Yep.
So when I see blastocystis on a patient's report, I'm not treating it because I have seen so many patients and practitioners try and treat it with antibiotics, antimicrobials, and then they retest and it's still there.
Yeah. And what have we done along the way in terms of the microbiome?
Exactly, the damage to the microbiome. So rather than trying to kill parasites, I simply support the environment. I will give targeted interventions to really favor a happy and healthy environment within the gut. So if they were potentially causing a problem, then at least the environment is happy and healthy.
Yes. Yep. I think that's such a good point. I know that I have blastocystis and I'm not worried about it at all. I might have one of the types that aren't that problematic. But again, it's about the awareness that, hey, it's not just one type. There could be, currently 8, but maybe many more to come. So, let's just not go bullet a gate when we see that on a report. And we've spoken about we've touched on antibiotics as a treatment and herbal microbials and things like that. Look, obviously people are taking lots of different medications and treatments for their gut. I just wanted to kind of touch on a few really common ones and just to see if there was any link or evidence in terms of how that does affect our gut. Because I think people are taking these thinking I'm doing something good, but again, what's actually happening? So Nexium, a proton pump inhibitor, lots of people I know are taking that for reflux. What's the evidence in terms of how it's actually affecting our broader microbiome?
Let me give you a quote from a research article published in 2017. And what they actually found in the study was those who took a PPI, so like Nexium, a proton pump inhibitor as like an antacid, had a 25% increased risk of premature death.
Wow.
So in other words, 1/4 of people who took long-term Nexium died earlier than what they should have.
Wow.
Nexium is by far one of the worst medications that we can actually take.
Yep.
Now, so much so that the governing body for GPs in mid 2024 came out to say, all right, GPs, your role is to take patients off PPIs or put them on the lowest dose possible.
Yep.
That is their overall governing body. That is their recommendation. Now, PPIs were first created for nausea during pregnancy, short-term use. They were never designed for long-term use.
Yeah.
I like to describe the gut as a conveyor belt. So you're thinking about from mouth to anus, it's a big, long conveyor belt, about 13 meters. Now, think about a factory, big factory, whether it's west of Sydney or inland of Melbourne, and let's say it's bottling up pasta sauce.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, if we did something at the beginning of that conveyor belt, maybe I pushed over a few bottles or I changed the tomato sauce, the end product, all the way at the very end, would look very different.
Yes.
So if we're affecting something further up this conveyor belt, our digestive tract, it's going to impact things further down.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's one of these things where it changes the environment in the gut. So much so that there is something called oral species. Oral species are bacteria which are commonly found in your mouth. Those who take PPIs will generally have 4 or more oral species within their stool microbiome. So these
it's able to it's been, it's getting through.
That's exactly right, because there's not enough acid in the stomach. They bypass this defense mechanism and are found in the stool. Now, this is really early research, but studies that came out in the last 6 months have linked the number of oral species with the diagnosis of chronic disease. So the more oral species you have in your stool, the greater odds you have of developing a chronic disease.
Yes. And I think when you say it, that makes sense because it's indicating that there is some dysfunction or many levels of dysfunction along the gut, such as maybe the stomach acid or something like that. So that's really interesting. Like the type of bacteria, where it's located, and the types can actually give us these different suggestions. What about antibiotics? Now, I know that that there's a time and place for these things, but like this, and I feel like maybe they're less candy-like in terms of just take that, just take that. But, are there certain antibiotics that have differences in the gut in terms of how they affect it? Like, what's the recovery time? Like, how do people offset the damage when they do need to use it? Like, yeah, talk to me about antibiotics.
So there's 2 things we need to consider. Is one of which is there low diversity, and the other is there high diversity.
So low diversity would be like less than 200, or would it be like less than 100 species?
Call it around 100.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. What the research shows is those who have a highly diverse microbiome, so more than 200 species, like myself, will be able to bounce back from antibiotics. In fact, their microbiome will almost go back to exactly what it was.
Yep.
So if I had to do a round of 7 days for antibiotics for whatever reason, within a month, about 98% of my microbiome would be able to bounce back.
Amazing.
However,
Hmm.
if you have a compromised microbiome, so around that 100 species, you would actually lose beneficial species. Your
Yeah.
microbiome may, almost go extinct in particular bacteria due to a course of antibiotics.
Yes.
There are three things I can recommend when it
Hmm.
comes around to taking antibiotics. And now these need to be done under the care of a healthcare professional,
Of course.
one of which is a type of yeast called SB, Saccharomyces boulardii. It's a yeast that protects the microbiome. That's number one. Number two is going to be a probiotic called Bifidobacterium lactis BB12.
Yep.
That has been shown to protect the microbiome, reduce the incidence of antibiotic-associated diarrhea,
Hmm.
thereby
Yep.
protecting the microbiome. And the third is a prebiotic called HMO, human milk oligosaccharides. It's a type of prebiotic fiber found in breast milk, which you
Yep.
can now take as a supplement, and it can actually protect the microbiome and help to rebuild the microbiome. They are at the core what I'd be recommending to my patients, but there are so many other factors about the types of food that we're eating
Mm.
to thereby bring back the microbiome. So it's really important to be utilizing one or all of these interventions during antibiotic use, but then afterwards, making sure that the diet is diverse and has a variety of different prebiotic fibers and targeted prebiotics to feed up the microbiome.
Yep. And I think people would love to know that because, like we said, there's a time and place. People just need it. They know there's an awareness that it might not be great for their gut. And people just like, I want to feel empowered with how I'm looking after myself. Now, something which I think is becoming a little bit more common due to the internet, Instagram, all those types of things is maybe looking at herbal treatments to address their gut. Now, there's lots I have to say about it, but I want to get your thoughts. Is it, and like lots of things also are being used for things like cholesterol or blood sugar that, like, again, people may not even be aware that's for their guts. I get kind of worried when I hear this kind of stuff. Like, what is going on? Should people be doing this? Are they accidentally affecting their gut when they're not aware of it? Yeah. So, how do our herbal antimicrobials affect our microbiome?
So first thing first, I'm a herbalist. I
Yes.
love my herbs.
Ditto.
And I utilize herbs in clinical practice.
Mm.
I'll utilize antimicrobials in clinical practice to help to eradicate potential pathogens. So I utilize them.
Yep.
This is something really close to my heart, and I almost get like frustrated and angry. And I've mentioned this to my wife a number of times, laying in bed and I'm on social media and you get these adverts for high dose berberine. And
Yep.
I show it to her. I'm like, oh, this makes me angry because berberine and oregano, they are very powerful herbs.
Hmm.
And when they're taken incorrectly, can cause more damage than benefit.
Yep.
So there has been a number of studies in the last few years which have actually shown that taking high dose berberine, which you can get over the counter at the pharmacy, can actually cause damage to the microbiome.
Mm. Mm.
Yep. But many practitioners would utilize some of these stronger antimicrobials for things like maybe SIBO or other pathogenic infections. So they are used. So don't be
Yes.
afraid if your
Yep.
practitioner is recommending them. But I would really give a high degree of caution from buying these
Yep.
because they're going to impact the microbiome. They really are.
Yep.
And you mentioned one thing about cholesterol and blood sugar. What I would argue is the concept of first do no harm.
Hmm.
Our philosophy, our beliefs that we follow are from Hippocrates, which
Yep.
is his commandments were first do no harm. We don't want to give an intervention that will cause harm to our patients.
Yep.
So when it comes around to cholesterol, we have dietary changes, we have probiotics, we
Yep.
have other herbal medicines
So many other things.
we can prescribe to bring down the cholesterol. For blood glucose, hey, let's do a continuous glucose monitor
Yep.
to measure the fluctuation of glucose throughout the day. Let's
Yep.
utilize things like zinc and beta-melon and chromium to target that rather than utilizing berberine.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, as a practitioner, at least I do, and I'm sure you do as well, we know that when we do use these, we know exactly what we're treating and why. So again, it's about the information that we are targeting with treatments. And there is also a mindfulness of offsetting any potential damage in terms of using potentially alongside it pre or probiotics, making sure the diet's in check,
Mhm, mhm.
to again decrease the amount of damage that we may encounter. So I know that we've been touching on and mentioning a few pre and probiotics. Do you have pre and probiotics that are favorites and again, I know this is probably, everyone's different, but like, are there some that you just like, "Oh, I just love you, like, do you think that stand out?"
I love all prebiotics.
Of
I
course you
really
do.
think that they are the superfood of my generation in the
Yes.
sense of their action is to feed up the bacteria in our
Mm,
gut.
mm,
And then as we feed them up, the bacteria will produce different compounds, which will help to reduce the risk of chronic disease and to
yeah.
fight disease.
Yeah.
Now, I don't believe that there is one golden prebiotic,
Mm,
okay? Because it really comes down to your microbiome.
yeah.
So, based on looking at your microbiome, we can actually say this is the prebiotic for you.
Yes.
My number one suggestion here is we don't want one particular prebiotic. We
Yep.
want a diverse array of prebiotics,
Yep.
whether it's in a supplement form,
Hmm.
whether it's in a diet form. The research is actually showing that it's not just one, it's actually
Yes.
having multiple at lower dosages and slowly working our way up. That is the key to really feed up the microbiome.
I mean, and that makes sense. Diversity supports diversity. Like, that is exactly what we're saying. We're saying don't just go gun ho on
Mhm,
inulin. We want
mhm.
to have inulin plus all the others because inulin, as an example, will favor certain species. We don't want to favor one or two or five species. We want we want to support them all.
My prediction is in the future, we will be able to measure the microbiome and then it would be able to calculate the exact formula of a prebiotic a person needs automatically.
That would
At
be
the moment,
amazing.
we can do that, but it
Yeah.
requires a practitioner like you were
Yeah.
right to interpret that data and then to create whether it's a compound or recommend a few specific interventions
Yeah.
to really treat that. But it will come in the future. I'm talking maybe 20 years' time,
Yeah.
where you just send off a sample and then a supplement will be sent to your door of the exact quantities of prebiotics that you need to feed up your microbiome.
Look, I mean, we've seen how much things have changed the last 10 to 15 years. I I would be very excited if that was the future. Like, that sounds really cool to me. I guess realistic expectations about treatment and management of the gut. I still feel like there's this pill for an ill or there's this quick fix, you know. I don't know if it's just like today's quick gratification, but like
Mhm.
what is realistic in terms of supporting our microbiome?
And it really depends on what the starting point is.
True.
So, a few examples here is if I have a patient who've got maybe 120 species in their gut, what I've seen doing a number of case studies now is we're able to add in about 20 to 25
Hmm.
new bacterial species every year.
Yep.
So, if we're aiming for 200, that's a 5-year journey
Yes.
to
Yep.
get to that point. There's a few things that we need to consider here is ongoing testing. So
Yep.
it's not like we measure the microbiome once and then that's it. With most of my patients, we will re-measure their microbiome every 6 months.
Yep.
Yep. Sometimes if it's quite a compromised microbiome, I might do it after 4 months.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, after 6 months, I will retest and then change the treatment plan based on that. A few case studies that I can provide you with in the sense of drastic change is, yeah, generally within a year, we can
Yep.
see quite a sharp change in the microbiome.
Yeah.
But it comes down to one particular factor, patient compliance.
Yes.
I've seen it too many times where you recommend an intervention and a diet to a patient and they start it, they feel good, and then they stop after 2 months. And then we
Mm-hmm.
retest their microbiome after 6, 12 months, and it's back to where it was.
Yeah.
We've got other patients where they are 100% dedicated and their microbiome will flourish and it will go, wow, you're developing the golden poop in the sense
Yeah.
of it's becoming healthy. So
It,
your microbiome can change in a positive way, but it takes time and it takes dedication and it takes precision
yeah.
to really come down to go, what does this individual need?
And I think that people need to hear that. And I like to support those sustainable strategies because we know the benefits will last for as long as we're doing it. It's like when you go to the gym, you might go
Mhm.
for a year, you build all this muscle, you stop going to the gym. What's going to happen to your muscle? The same as your gut. Like if you go on this high fiber prebiotic diet for a year and then you're just like, I'm done with that. I'm going to go back to my old ways. The gut isn't going to maintain. It's going to respond to the environment that you're giving it. So I think, that mindset of sustainability is really key. And that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy pizza or a donut or a glass of wine here and there, but it's really about promoting those sustainable strategies of exactly what you said, diverse food, prebiotics. If there's anything targeted needed, like what does that look like? And adjusting that through testing, I think that's really, really important. And what you mentioned about the increase in species over a set number of years, that's also a really great benchmark for people to have in their head as well. Again, like everyone's different, but it's nice to have these benchmarks people can just kind of keep in the back of their mind. What are some things that people can start doing from a dietary thing now? I feel like it's, maybe repeating what was said, but people need to hear it again. If they're in the process of getting like a diagnosis or like finding a right practitioner, like what can people start doing for their gut right now?
Diversity, diversity, diversity.
Yep.
Aiming for 30 to 40 different plant-based foods in your diet each and every week.
Yep.
When I say plant-based foods, I'm talking about nuts and seeds, different grains, fruits and vegetables, herbs, all of which will help to feed the microbiome.
Mm.
When it comes down to more targeted interventions, what I love to tell patients is lentils and legumes and beans. And I
Mm.
know many will go, oh, the gas,
Yep.
oh, the bloating. But that is because your microbiome isn't used to digesting these. There are
Yes.
particular compounds in legumes and lentils and beans that our body can't digest, that we
Yep.
rely on our microbiome to digest.
Mm.
So it comes down to slowly introducing these. And with
Yep.
some patients, I'm talking about a teaspoon of lentils a day.
Yes.
And that is a teaspoon of lentils a day for 6 months.
Yep.
And then we increase it to a tablespoon, to 3 tablespoons, until the point where you can sit down and eat a bowl of dal and lentils and so forth. And maybe there's some people listening at the moment going, oh God, I can't do any more beans or legumes. But if you look at a lot of traditional cultures over in India, or even China and the Middle East, legumes and lentils and grains were a fundamental component.
Mm.
There's also this fear around grains and
Yes.
gluten.
Yep.
And maybe that's a topic for another day, a whole podcast on debunking grains.
Yes.
But broadly speaking, we shouldn't be afraid of grains.
Yes.
Grains feed up our microbiome, but there's a few nuances here. We want them to be organic and maybe fermented and introduce them at a slow level and target grains that aren't going to induce an inflammatory response. So don't be afraid of whole grains. I'm not talking about white bread and
Oh,
pizza. I'm talking about traditional rye
yes.
sourdough with a poached egg and some avocado, maybe some baked beans. Fantastic.
I think that's really smart. So utilizing your diet, diversity, starting slow. I think there are some great that they're really, again, easy to implement. These are the free things that we can start doing today. And so if someone does have a gut feeling that there is something wrong with their gut, what would you suggest to them would be their first step, aside from obviously seeing if they can modify their diet? Like what would be like where do they start?
Test, don't guess.
Yep.
Measure your microbiome. Invest in your health to
Hmm.
measure the microbiome to understand what's going on. Find a practitioner who knows what they're doing, who are well versed in the area of the microbiome to get them the most value for money.
Yeah. I think that is incredible, sensible, and I think we've just covered so much today. What I will do for everybody who's listening is I will put your contact details in the show notes, Brad. So if anyone wants to hit him up, you'll know exactly how. But I've had such a great chat, and I think we've opened many doors of conversation. I wish we could have gone down. You may have to come on again to explore some of those. But thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
It's been great. I've really enjoyed chatting, and we've really highlighted the importance of the microbiome.
We sure have. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.